The moment BlueFace opened his mouth this time, everything detonated at once. Because according to insiders, he didn't just throw shade. He erased 2 women from his life with a single sentence. He allegedly said Chrisean and Jaidyn are mid, and then without hesitation claimed he needs a new baby mother. Not privately, not joking, not whispered behind closed doors. Said it like a conclusion, like a decision already made. And the room reportedly went silent. Sources say there was a pause after he said it, the kind where everyone looks at each other, wondering if they heard him right. Because calling one woman mid is disrespect. Calling both women who carried your children mid? That's something else entirely. That's declaration. And the way he said it made it worse. Insiders describe his tone as detached, calm, almost bored, like he was reviewing options, not talking about human beings, like motherhood was a role to be replaced, not a bond built through years of chaos, sacrifice, and public humiliation. He said it like he was upgrading phones, one source claimed. And once those words left his mouth, there was no pulling them back. Because this wasn't just about attraction, this wasn't just about preference, this was about discarding history. Chrisean, the woman he built an entire viral era with. The woman who bled, cried, screamed, and embarrassed herself publicly for him. Jaidyn, the woman who held it down quietly, raised kids, stayed loyal through scandal after scandal, and kept his world stable when everything else was burning. Both reduced to the same word, mid. And then came the part that made people physically uncomfortable. According to insiders, BlueFace didn't stop there. He allegedly doubled down, saying he needs a baby mother who gets it, who moves smarter, who doesn't bring drama. That sentence alone flipped the internet upside down once it leaked. Because how do you talk about drama when you're the common denominator? How do you demand smart moves when chaos follows you everywhere you go? And that's when people realized something darker was happening. This wasn't rejection. This was rewriting the narrative. By calling both women mid, BlueFace wasn't just insulting them, he was minimizing their importance, reducing their roles, stripping them of individuality so he could justify replacing them without guilt. And that's why the backlash was immediate. Fans weren't even debating whether the comment was disrespectful. That was obvious. What they were asking was far more dangerous. Why does he only devalue women after they give him children? Why does admiration turn into dismissal the moment accountability enters the picture? Why does he talk about new baby mothers like interchangeable parts? And the timing made it worse. Because this comment didn't come during peace. It came during fallout. During fractured family relationships. During public scrutiny. During moments where humility would have saved him. Instead, he chose superiority. Sources say people close to him were stunned not because he was harsh, but because he seemed proud. Like this was him reclaiming control. Like dismissing both women at once made him untouchable again. But what he didn't realize? This wasn't power. This was exposure. Because the moment that clip leaked, the internet didn't just turn on him, it connected dots. People pulled old interviews, old lives, old moments where he praised one woman while degrading the other. Now they saw the pattern clearly. Idealize, use, blame, discard. And suddenly, I need a new baby mother didn't sound confident. It sounded empty. Because children aren't accessories. And motherhood isn't replaceable. And here's the part that shook even his supporters. Insiders say when someone challenged him, asked how he could say that about the mothers of his kids, his response wasn't reflective. It was cold. That's my truth. That sentence alone guaranteed this story wouldn't die quietly. Because once you frame cruelty as truth, people stop defending you. And now, as this comment spreads like wildfire, both women are being watched closely. Chrisean, known for reacting emotionally. Jaidyn, known for staying silent until she's done. And insiders say one of them is about to break that silence. Not with insults, not with lives, but with something far more damaging. Because when you call the mothers of your children mid, you don't just disrespect them, you invite them to speak. And once that happens, the narrative won't belong to BlueFace anymore. What made this comment even more explosive is when he said it, and who was in the room when it happened. According to insiders, this wasn't some random late-night rant or drunk livestream moment. This was said in a setting where BlueFace believed he was being respected, backed, and validated. People around him were nodding, laughing lightly, letting him talk without pushback. That environment matters. Because when someone feels affirmed while saying something cruel, it stops being an outburst and starts becoming belief. Sources say BlueFace had already been irritated that day. Not because of Chrisean, not because of Jaidyn, but because he felt cornered. family tension, online backlash, people questioning his choices, his authority, his image. And instead of sitting with that pressure, he redirected it, straight at the two women who can't simply walk away from his life. That's when he allegedly said it slow, deliberate, almost casual. They both I need a new baby mother. People in the room reportedly froze for a split second. Not because they disagreed, but because they understood how bad this would look if it ever got out. And still, no one stopped him. That silence is important, because it gave him permission to keep going. Insiders claim he went on to explain himself. He talked about standards, about wanting someone more polished, someone who doesn't stress him out, someone who won't make him look bad. And that's where the narrative really cracked. Because when you listen closely, it becomes clear. He wasn't talking about love. He wasn't talking about compatibility. He was talking about optics, how a woman reflects on him, how motherhood fits into his brand, how children exist around his lifestyle. That's why people were so disturbed. Because it sounded like he wasn't looking for a partner, he was shopping for a role. And the internet felt it immediately. Once the comment leaked, reactions came in waves. Not just fans, but women who had supported him for years suddenly pulled back. Mothers spoke up. Fathers weighed in. People stopped laughing and started questioning character. How do you downgrade the women who gave you kids? Why is new baby mother even a phrase? This man talks about women like contracts. Even some of his loudest supporters went quiet. But the most telling reaction? Chrisean didn't respond. No live, no story, no meltdown. That alone raised eyebrows. Because Chrisean is known for reacting quickly, emotionally, loudly. Silence from her. That meant something was processing behind the scenes. And Jaidyn? She didn't subtweet. She didn't post cryptic captions. She allegedly did something much colder. According to people close to her, she laughed. Not a happy laugh. Not a bitter laugh. A tired laugh. The kind that comes when someone finally confirms what you already knew. Sources say Jaidyn told someone privately, "That's how he really feels." That sentence changed the tone completely. Because now this wasn't about being insulted. It was about confirmation. Confirmation that loyalty doesn't protect you. Confirmation that motherhood doesn't earn respect. Confirmation that silence doesn't save you. And here's where the escalation gets dangerous. Insiders say one of the women, not the one people expect, is preparing to respond in a way that doesn't involve yelling, dragging, or embarrassment. It involves context, receipts, timelines, and proof of how often admiration turned into dismissal once boundaries were set. And once that happens, BlueFace's comment won't be seen as confidence anymore. It'll be seen as a pattern. Because calling two women mid isn't just rude, it's strategic. It flattens them into one category so he doesn't have to explain why both relationships ended the same way. And the moment people catch on to that, the spotlight shifts. From Chrisean, from Jaidyn, straight onto him. And insiders are saying the next move, whether it's a statement, a leak, or a sudden silence, will decide whether this becomes just another viral controversy, or the moment his public image takes a hit it doesn't recover from. Because once mothers start speaking not emotionally, but factually, there's no rebranding that can save you. The tension didn't break immediately. It hung, heavy, uncomfortable, like everyone involved knew the next move would decide everything. And what shocked people the most was who stayed quiet the longest. It wasn't Chrisean. It was Jaidyn. Insiders say Chrisean heard about the comment the same way everyone else did, through reposts, clips, DMs flooding her phone all at once. People expected fireworks. They expected emotion. They expected another viral meltdown. But that didn't come. Instead, sources claim Chrisean went completely off-grid for hours. No posts, no reactions, no cryptic messages. Which for her was unusual. Because Chrisean usually reacts from the heart. Immediately, loudly, publicly. This time, she didn't. And that's when people started to get nervous. Because silence from someone who's usually explosive doesn't mean peace. It means processing. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's reaction was even more telling. According to people close to her, she didn't cry. She didn't argue. She didn't even sound angry. She allegedly sat back, listened to everything, and said one sentence that froze the room. So now he's saying it out loud. That line alone reframed everything. Because it suggested this wasn't new. It was just finally public. Sources say Jaidyn has heard versions of this before behind closed doors, in moments where BlueFace thought he was untouchable. Comments about options, about upgrading, about wanting someone who fits a certain image. But this time, he said it where it could never be walked back. And that's when Jaidyn allegedly made a decision. Not emotional, not impulsive. Strategic. According to insiders, she began organizing things quietly. Old messages, conversations, patterns. Moments where praise turned into dismissal, the moment she stopped complying. The moment she asked for boundaries. The moment she put the kids first. Because here's the detail that's starting to surface now. Both women didn't get called mid at the same time by accident. It happened after both of them stopped playing their roles. Chrisean stopped chasing. Jaidyn stopped staying silent. And once they stopped being useful, they became disposable. That realization is what's fueling the next wave of backlash. Because people are now asking a much darker question. Is BlueFace only attracted to women when they're willing to tolerate chaos? And once that question entered the conversation, the narrative changed fast. Clips resurfaced of him praising both women in the past, calling them different, real, ride or die. Now those same clips look eerie. Like love was conditional, temporary, based on compliance. And here's where the escalation turns brutal. According to insiders, Jaidyn is the one preparing to speak first. Not with insults, not with emotion, with facts. People close to her say she's tired of the idea that women switch up when relationships end. She wants to show how the switch actually happens on the other side, how affection turns into contempt once accountability shows up. And what makes this dangerous for BlueFace? She doesn't need to exaggerate. The truth is enough. Meanwhile, Chrisean's silence is being interpreted differently. Sources say she's torn, hurt, embarrassed. Because being called mid publicly by the father of your child isn't just disrespect, it's humiliating. But people close to her say she's realizing something painful in real time. The chaos she fought for never fought for her. And that realization is hitting harder than any insult. Insiders claim she told someone quietly, "He always talks like that when he's done." That sentence is chilling. Because it suggests this isn't bravado, it's exit language. The kind of language people use when they're trying to justify leaving without guilt. And the internet is catching on. People are no longer asking, "Why did he say it?" They're asking, "What is he trying to prepare us for? A new woman? A new storyline? A clean slate where the past gets labeled mid so the future looks justified?" If so, the timing couldn't be worse. Because when you publicly disrespect the mothers of your children, you don't just lose goodwill, you activate them. And insiders are warning. Once Jaidyn speaks, Chrisean won't be far behind. Not to fight each other, but to confirm something people are just beginning to see. That this isn't about rivalry, it's about pattern. And once two women who were pitted against each other start aligning even indirectly, that's when things become irreversible. Because BlueFace may think calling them mid lowers their value. But what it's actually doing is raising questions he won't be able to outrun. And the next development? It doesn't involve shouting. It doesn't involve drama. It involves timelines. And once those timelines go public, this story won't be about mid anymore. It'll be about motive. What BlueFace didn't anticipate, what completely caught him off guard, was how fast the energy shifted once people stopped reacting emotionally and started listening carefully. Because the moment Jaidyn's name started trending again, it wasn't attached to insults or clapbacks. It was attached to questions. People noticed she wasn't ranting. She wasn't posting cryptic quotes. She wasn't doing interviews. Instead, she was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, calculated, like someone deciding how much truth is actually necessary. According to insiders, Jaidyn had been sitting on years of context. Not explosive scandals, not shocking secrets, but something far more dangerous to someone like BlueFace. Consistency. Patterns that repeat so often they stop looking like coincidence. Sources say she began by writing things down. Not for social media, just for herself. Dates. Conversations. Moments when praise suddenly flipped into criticism. Times when she was called real, until she asked for respect. Times when she was the best baby mother, until she stopped covering for his chaos. And the more she wrote, the clearer it became. The word mid wasn't new. It was just louder. According to someone close to her, Jaidyn realized something painful but clarifying. Every time she stopped being convenient, she became expendable. And once she became expendable, the narrative shifted to make it sound justified. That's when she decided to stop defending herself entirely. No more explaining. No more clarifying. No more proving her worth. Instead, she let the timeline speak. And once people noticed that shift, support didn't come in loud waves, it came in quiet alignment. Women who had followed the situation for years started connecting dots on their own. Old clips resurfaced. Screenshots of past praise side by side with recent insults. The contrast was jarring. Meanwhile, Chrisean's silence finally broke, but not the way anyone expected. She didn't go live. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. According to insiders, she sent a voice note to someone close to her that leaked in fragments. Her tone wasn't angry. It was tired. In it, she allegedly said, "He always does that when he's already made up his mind. He talks down so he don't gotta explain." That one sentence hit harder than any rant ever could. Because it confirmed what people were starting to suspect. This wasn't confidence. This wasn't honesty. It was distance creation. Language used to emotionally step away before physically stepping away. And once that clicked, the internet response changed completely. People stopped arguing over who was better. They stopped comparing Chrisean and Jaidyn. Instead, they started asking why both women ended up in the same place. Same disrespect. Same dismissal. Same timing. And that's when the most uncomfortable realization surfaced. The common factor wasn't them. It was him. According to insiders, BlueFace began feeling the pressure at this point. Not from fans, but from people who actually matter to him. Quiet conversations, side comments, industry whispers suggesting he was damaging something deeper than just relationships. And instead of walking it back, he leaned in. Sources claim he doubled down privately, insisting people were too sensitive and that he was just being honest. But that explanation didn't land the way he thought it would. Because honesty without empathy doesn't read as truth. It reads as entitlement. And entitlement is where support starts to evaporate. What made it worse is that BlueFace allegedly began floating the idea of moving on publicly, not naming anyone, but hinting at fresh starts, new energy, and better alignment. That's when things crossed from disrespect into provocation. Because now it wasn't just words, it was intent. And insiders say, Jaidyn noticed. According to someone close to her, she said something quietly that's now being repeated everywhere behind the scenes. He's trying to rewrite the story before it finishes. That sentence explains everything. Because once someone starts rewriting history, it means they're afraid of what the full version looks like. And that's why this situation is far from over. Because Jaidyn hasn't spoken yet, not really. Chrisean hasn't reacted publicly, not fully. But both women now understand something they didn't before. They're not rivals in this moment. They're evidence. And evidence doesn't need to yell. It just needs to be shown. Insiders are saying the next development won't be dramatic. It won't be loud. It will be structured. And once that happens, BlueFace's comment about needing a new baby mother won't look like confidence anymore. It'll look like someone trying to outrun accountability. Because when two women who were pitted against each other start seeing the same pattern, the story stops being about them and starts being about why that pattern exists at all. And that's the part no rebrand can survive. By this point, the conversation had completely slipped out of BlueFace's control. Not because anyone was yelling louder than him. Not because either woman was dragging him online. But because people were finally paying attention to what he was doing instead of what he was saying. And that's when things got dangerous. Because once patterns are seen, they can't be unseen. According to insiders, BlueFace started sensing that the narrative was turning. The jokes weren't landing the same. The confidence he usually relied on wasn't buffering the criticism. People weren't reacting with outrage anymore, they were reacting with recognition. And recognition is far more threatening. That's when he allegedly started testing the waters. Subtle posts, cryptic captions about moving forward, comments about not settling, references to knowing your worth. On the surface, it looked like motivation, but people who've watched him for years recognized it instantly. This was preparation language, the kind people use when they're about to justify a decision that won't sit well with the public. And that's when something unexpected happened. Women who had followed him casually, who weren't fans of Chrisean or Jaidyn, specifically started speaking up. Mothers, single parents, even men who had defended him before began saying the same thing. You don't talk about the mothers of your kids like that. That statement echoed everywhere. Because regardless of personal feelings, regardless of attraction, regardless of past drama, there's an unspoken rule. One that most people understand instinctively. You don't reduce the women who gave you children to a rating. And once that moral line was crossed, BlueFace stopped being seen as controversial. He started being seen as reckless. Sources say people close to him tried to warn him, told him the comment had gone too far. That doubling down would only make it worse. That he should clarify, apologize, reframe. But according to insiders, he brushed it off. They know what I mean, he allegedly said. That sentence did more damage than any insult, because it showed he believed people would interpret his words generously. They didn't. Instead, they interpreted them literally. And that's when the most uncomfortable realization began spreading quietly. BlueFace doesn't seem to value motherhood unless it serves him. That's a brutal conclusion, but it's the one people started reaching on their own. Because when you look at the timeline, it lines up too cleanly to ignore. Praise when compliant, dismissal when resistant, replacement talk when challenged. That cycle appeared with both women. And once two separate stories start ending the same way, the problem stops being coincidence. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Jaidyn was still quiet, but insiders say her quiet wasn't passive, it was decisive. According to someone close to her, she'd already made peace with the idea that speaking publicly might not change anything. What mattered to her wasn't winning the internet, it was protecting her children from growing up watching their mother be disrespected without context. And that's why the next move is so calculated. Sources say Jaidyn isn't planning a rant. She isn't planning an interview. She isn't even planning a tell-all. She's planning clarity. Simple, measured, undeniable. No insults, no exaggeration. Just enough truth to show how quickly mid replaces appreciated once a woman stops bending. And that's what has people nervous. Because BlueFace thrives in chaos. He survives drama. But clarity? Clarity doesn't give him room to perform. And as for Chrisean, her silence is being interpreted more seriously by the day. People close to her say she's wrestling with embarrassment more than anger. Because being publicly reduced after everything she went through doesn't just hurt, it forces reflection. Reflection about what she defended, what she tolerated, what she fought for. And insiders say she's coming to terms with something painful. The loyalty she gave wasn't returned in respect. That realization is changing how she moves. Which brings us to the moment everyone's waiting for. Because according to multiple sources, BlueFace is about to make another statement. Not to apologize, not to explain, but to assert control again. And if he does what insiders think he's going to do, it won't calm the situation. It will confirm everything people are starting to believe. Because once someone shows you how easily they replace the mothers of their children in conversation, you stop wondering why relationships fail. You start understanding why they all end the same way. And the next development? It doesn't involve insults. It doesn't involve shouting. It involves receipts, meeting reputation. And once that collision happens, this story won't be about who's mid anymore. It'll be about who misunderstood their power and lost it. By the time BlueFace realized the ground had shifted under him, the conversation had already moved past his control. Because the problem wasn't the word mid anymore. It was what that word revealed. People weren't reacting to insult, they were reacting to intent. According to insiders, the moment BlueFace hinted again about wanting a new baby mother, something snapped quietly behind the scenes. Not publicly, not loudly, but in the places that actually shape how stories end. Mothers stopped defending him. Industry people stopped joking it off. Even some of his closest supporters started asking questions they'd avoided for years. And the biggest question was simple and brutal. Why does he only talk about replacement when accountability shows up? Because when you strip away the attitude, the bravado, the shock value language, what's left is a pattern people can't ignore anymore. Admire loudly, benefit quietly, dismiss publicly, replace verbally. And once people saw that cycle repeat with both Chrisean and Jaidyn, the conversation stopped being emotional and started being analytical. That's when timelines started circulating. Fans laid out moments where BlueFace praised Jaidyn as solid and real when she stayed quiet, then compared those moments to when she spoke up, and how fast the tone changed. The same with Chrisean, the passion, the chaos, the devotion, followed by distance, ridicule, and eventually, dismissal. Different women, same ending. And once that clicked, BlueFace's words lost their edge. They started sounding defensive. Sources say BlueFace felt that shift. He allegedly complained privately that people were turning sensitive and reading too much into it. But the more he minimized, the more obvious it became that he didn't understand what people were actually reacting to. It wasn't about attraction. It was about dehumanization. Talking about new baby mothers like upgrades doesn't just insult the women involved. It reduces motherhood to a function, a role to be filled by whoever fits the aesthetic of the moment. And that's what made this moment different from past controversies. Because this time, the outrage wasn't led by fans of either woman. It was led by people who recognized the mindset. People who had seen it before. People who had lived it. People who understood exactly what happens when someone starts talking like this. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the silence from both women grew heavier. Chrisean's circle says she's been noticeably quieter, more withdrawn, less reactive, less impulsive. And for someone known for emotional transparency, That shift is alarming. According to insiders, she's dealing with something deeper than anger. Disillusionment. Because being publicly downgraded by the father of your child forces you to confront a truth you can't fight your way out of. You can't argue respect into existence. And Jaidyn? Her silence is being described as finished. Not calm, not healing. Finished. Sources say she's already detached emotionally, and when that happens, it's not drama that follows, it's closure. The kind that doesn't require explanation. People close to her claim she said something recently that sums up where her head is at. When someone tells you who they are, you don't argue. You listen. That sentence is spreading quietly, because it reframes everything. BlueFace didn't insult them accidentally. He didn't speak recklessly. He spoke honestly. And honesty, in this case, exposed how he sees women once they stop serving his narrative. That's why the next move matters so much. Because insiders are saying BlueFace is preparing to introduce new energy publicly. New faces, new associations, possibly even someone new by his side. And if that happens now, it won't read as moving on. It'll read as confirmation. Confirmation that mid wasn't a joke. Confirmation that replacement was always the plan. Confirmation that accountability was never coming. And that's where this story becomes irreversible. Because once the public decides they've seen enough pattern to predict the ending, no statement can undo it, no apology can reframe it, and no new relationship can distract from it. The only thing left at that point is silence or exposure. And insiders say one of those is coming next. Very soon. Because when two women who were once pitted against each other stop reacting and start observing, the man at the center should be very careful. Because attention fades, but pattern recognition doesn't. And once that door opens, there's no closing it again. By now, it wasn't even about what BlueFace said anymore. It was about how little he seemed to care once the meaning landed. Because while the internet was dissecting his words, something else was happening quietly in the background, something that doesn't show up in clips or captions. People were pulling away, not loudly, not dramatically, just distancing. According to insiders, BlueFace started noticing it in subtle ways first. Messages taking longer to come back. Calls going unanswered. People who used to laugh at his jokes suddenly responding with, "Yeah," and nothing else. The room felt different. And that's when reality started setting in. Because controversy usually fuels him. Drama usually keeps him relevant. But this time, the energy wasn't feeding him. It was withdrawing. And that scared him. Sources say he began pushing the narrative harder, talking more confidently, leaning into bravado, doubling down on the idea that he knows what he wants and isn't afraid to say it. But the harder he leaned in, the more obvious it became that he was trying to outrun something. Consequences. Because when you publicly reduce the mothers of your children to a rating, you don't just offend fans. You alert people who think long-term. Brands. Gatekeepers. Decision-makers. People who don't want chaos attached to their name. And insiders claim conversations started happening that BlueFace wasn't part of. People asking, is this sustainable? People asking, is he maturing or getting worse? People asking, do we want to be tied to this? That's when the situation crossed from viral to structural. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's silence was doing more damage than any rant ever could. Because silence forces people to project, and what people were projecting wasn't flattering to BlueFace. They weren't imagining her hurt, they were imagining her done. And when a woman who's been quiet for years finally looks finished, people take that seriously. According to someone close to Jaidyn, she hasn't said much at all lately. No emotional processing out loud. No spiraling, just short, grounded conversations focused on logistics, routines, and stability. That shift is dangerous for someone like BlueFace. Because chaos thrives on reaction. And she's no longer reacting. Chrisean, on the other hand, is in a different place. Sources say she's oscillating between anger and sadness but leaning more towards sadness now. Because anger still holds hope. Sadness doesn't. People close to her say she's embarrassed not just by the insult, but by how easily it was said. Like all the history, the sacrifice, the public humiliation she endured meant nothing the moment he decided to speak casually. That kind of realization cuts deep, and here's where the story takes a sharp turn. According to insiders, someone close to BlueFace finally sat him down and said something no one else had been willing to say directly. You're burning bridges you don't get to rebuild. That sentence hit harder than any online backlash. Because it wasn't about optics. It wasn't about headlines. It was about legacy. About how his kids will one day read these quotes. About how his words will age when bravado fades. About how calling their mothers mid will look when they're old enough to understand. Sources say BlueFace didn't respond immediately. He went quiet. And that silence wasn't confidence, it was calculation. Because now he's at a crossroads. Double down and commit fully to the image he's been projecting. Or step back and acknowledge that something went too far. But here's the problem. Acknowledging it now doesn't erase it. Because once people see the mindset behind the words, apologies feel strategic. And strategic apologies don't heal damage, they confirm it. That's why the next move is so critical. Because insiders say BlueFace is considering making a definitive statement soon. Something final. Something meant to close the chapter and move forward. But here's what he doesn't seem to understand. You don't get to close a chapter you didn't write alone. Chrisean hasn't spoken yet. Jaidyn hasn't spoken yet. And the moment either one does calmly, clearly, without emotion, the entire story will crystallize. Not as drama, not as gossip, but as a documented pattern. And patterns don't care how confident you sound. They speak for themselves. That's why the tension hasn't broken yet. It's still building. Because once the silence finally breaks, once one of them decides to speak not from pain, but from clarity, this won't be about it won't be about attraction, it won't even be about replacement. It'll be about how power was used and misused. And when that conversation starts, there's no going back to jokes. There's only reckoning. And insiders say that moment isn't weeks away. It's imminent. What finally pushed this into a completely different category was the realization that nothing was being denied. BlueFace wasn't saying the clip was fake. He wasn't saying it was taken out of context. He wasn't even trying to soften the language. He was letting it sit. And in situations like this, silence doesn't mean confidence. It means calculation. According to insiders, BlueFace started telling people privately that the internet always forgets, and that this would blow over like everything else. That people were too invested and would move on once something louder came along. That mindset is exactly what people picked up on. Because it confirmed what many were already thinking. He wasn't shocked by the reaction, he was annoyed by it. Annoyed that people took his words seriously. Annoyed that they attached meaning to them. Annoyed that accountability was even being discussed. And that's when the backlash hardened. Not louder. Not angrier. Colder. People stopped tagging him. Stopped defending him. Stopped reframing his behavior as just how he is. Instead, the conversation shifted to something far more damaging. Would you want your daughter with someone like this? That question alone changed everything. Because once that enters the discourse, it's no longer about fandom or bias. It's about values. And values don't bend for clout. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Jaidyn's silence continued to work against him in ways he didn't expect. Sources say people began reaching out to her not to stir drama, but to check on her. To ask if she was okay. To ask how she was handling it. And every time, her response was reportedly calm, polite, short. I'm good. I'm focused on my kids. I'm not speaking on it. That restraint did something powerful. It made her credible. Because when someone refuses to defend themselves while being insulted publicly, people assume there's nothing to prove or too much to reveal. And that assumption is dangerous. Chrisean's situation is more fragile. Insiders say she's been struggling privately, not because of public opinion, but because the comment forced her to confront a painful truth. The man she defended endlessly doesn't hesitate to diminish her when it suits him. That kind of realization doesn't explode outward, it collapses inward. And people close to her say she's processing regret not just about the relationship, but about how much she sacrificed publicly for someone who now talks about replacing her like a position. That's why her silence feels different this time. It's not strategic, it's wounded. And that contrast between Jaidyn's composure and Chrisean's withdrawal is making the story heavier, not messier. Because it shows two different responses to the same kind of disrespect, and both responses are indictments. According to insiders, the real tension now is around what happens next. BlueFace reportedly believes that introducing new energy will reset the narrative. That moving forward visibly will drown out the criticism. That once attention shifts, the conversation will die. But people watching this closely know something he doesn't seem to grasp. Replacement doesn't erase pattern. It confirms it. And that's why the stakes are higher than he realizes. Because if he moves on publicly right now, if he's seen with someone new, especially while still talking dismissively about the mothers of his children, the conversation won't reset. It will lock in. People will stop waiting for accountability and start treating his behavior as a settled conclusion. And once that happens, the damage isn't loud. It's permanent. The most telling sign of all? People aren't asking for apologies anymore. They're asking for distance. They're asking why platforms keep rewarding behavior that openly devalues motherhood. They're asking why disrespect gets reframed as honesty. They're asking why no one in his circle seems willing to challenge him publicly. Those questions don't fade. They build pressure. And insiders say that pressure is starting to show. BlueFace's confidence isn't cracking publicly but privately. He's aware something shifted. That the audience isn't reacting the way it used to. That the room feels quieter. And quiet is where reckoning happens. Because drama thrives on noise. Patterns thrive in silence. And right now, the silence is loud. Everyone is waiting. Waiting to see if Jaidyn will finally speak, not emotionally, but clearly. Waiting to see if Chrisean will break her quiet, not to react, but to reflect. Waiting to see if BlueFace will double down, or finally realize that words don't disappear once they reveal how you see people. Because once you call the mothers of your children mid, once you talk about replacement instead of responsibility, once you show the world how easily respect leaves your voice, you don't get to control how that truth follows you. And whatever happens next won't be driven by outrage. It'll be driven by memory. And memory is the one thing clout can't outrun. By this point, the silence had become louder than anything anyone could say. Because the longer BlueFace stayed casual about it, the more people realized something unsettling. He wasn't embarrassed. He was unmoved. And that realization is what flipped the mood from disappointment to concern. According to insiders, BlueFace genuinely believed this moment would pass the same way every other controversy had. A few days of noise, some angry comments, then a new headline, a new distraction, a new viral clip to wash it all away. But this time, the internet didn't move on. It slowed down. And slowing down is dangerous because that's when people start remembering. They remembered how often he praised Jaidyn for being low drama when she stayed quiet. They remembered how quickly that praise disappeared the moment she asserted boundaries. They remembered how Chrisean was once called his ride or die, until her loyalty became inconvenient. Suddenly, mid didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like a final label he applies when he's done extracting value, and that's what disturbed people. Because it wasn't just cruel, it was transactional. Behind the scenes, sources say conversations started happening that BlueFace wasn't part of. Not gossip conversations, assessment conversations. The kind where people ask whether continuing to associate publicly is worth the long-term fallout. And while he was brushing it off as internet talk, the effects were real. Invites slowed. Support cooled. Energy shifted. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's restraint kept tightening the spotlight. The more she refused to react, the more credible she became. People stopped viewing her as part of the drama and started seeing her as separate from it, as someone who had already emotionally exited long before the insult ever went public. And that's when a new narrative started forming quietly. She's not hurt. She's done. That interpretation matters. Because when someone is hurt, there's still leverage. There's still emotion to provoke. But when someone is done, they don't need to speak loudly. They just need to be accurate. According to insiders, Jaidyn has been warned repeatedly that if she speaks, it will open doors she might not want opened. That it will escalate things. That it could get messy. Her reported response? I'm not scared of the truth. That sentence alone sent a chill through people who heard it. Because truth doesn't need theatrics. It just needs order. And that's exactly what BlueFace isn't prepared for. He knows how to fight chaos. He knows how to perform through outrage. He knows how to talk his way out of heat. But structure, timelines, consistency, those don't give him room to improvise. And as for Chrisean, her silence has started being read as grief rather than strategy. People close to her say she's struggling with the emotional whiplash of being publicly discarded after everything she endured. That the insult didn't just hurt her pride, it rewired how she sees the entire relationship. When someone you defended endlessly talks about replacing you like an option, it forces a reckoning you can't scream your way out of. That's why her quiet feels heavier this time. And that's why people are bracing themselves. Because insiders are now saying the next move won't come from BlueFace at all. It'll come from documentation, not leaked out of anger, not dropped for shock value, but shared calmly piece by piece to show how praise turned into dismissal the moment boundaries appeared. If that happens, this won't be about insults anymore. It'll be about credibility. And credibility is the one thing bravado can't overpower. Because once the story is framed as a pattern instead of a moment, the audience doesn't need convincing. They just need confirmation. And that's why this feels different. No yelling. No chaos. No viral meltdown. Just a tightening silence. And a growing sense that when the next piece drops, it won't be dramatic. It'll be devastating. Because the most damaging stories aren't the loud ones. They're the ones that make people say, quietly, "Oh, now it makes sense." And insiders say that moment is closer than BlueFace realizes. Very close. The longer this stretches on, the clearer one thing becomes. This isn't fading. It's settling. And that distinction matters more than anything. Because when stories fade, people forget details. When stories settle, people remember patterns. According to insiders, BlueFace has started to feel that difference in real time. Not in comments, not in headlines, but in how people interact with him privately. The tone is different. Less excitement, less encouragement, more distance. People aren't challenging him loudly anymore. They're stepping back quietly. And that's usually the last stage before reputations harden. Sources say someone close to him finally tried to explain it in a way he couldn't dismiss. They told him this wasn't about being cancelled. It wasn't about internet outrage. It was about how he framed motherhood, and how that framing stuck. Because once you publicly talk about needing a new baby mother, you're not just insulting individuals, you're revealing how you see the role itself. And that's why this hit a nerve, not just with fans, with parents, with people who've lived through similar dynamics. The language felt too familiar. People started sharing their own experiences in comments and threads, stories about being praised until they set boundaries, about being valued until they stopped absorbing chaos, about being replaced the moment they stopped being convenient. And suddenly, BlueFace wasn't just a celebrity anymore. He was a case study. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's silence has evolved into something unmistakable. Finality. According to those close to her, she isn't waiting for the right moment to speak. She isn't building suspense. She isn't negotiating with herself. She's already decided what her future looks like, and it doesn't involve public back and forth. That's the part BlueFace doesn't seem to understand. He's used to reactions, used to engagement, used to emotional response. What he's not used to is someone exiting the narrative completely. Because when someone stops reacting, they stop giving you control. And control is what this has always been about. As for Chrisean, insiders say her internal battle is becoming more visible to those around her. Not online, but in how she's moving. Less impulsive, less reactive, more withdrawn. Like someone realizing that the fight they kept choosing was never actually being fought with them. Being called mid, publicly, didn't just insult her, it reframed the entire relationship in one sentence. It turned years of sacrifice into something disposable. And that kind of realization doesn't explode. It implodes. People close to her say she's grieving not just the relationship, but the version of herself that believed loyalty would eventually be rewarded with respect. That's a hard thing to let go of. And it's why her silence feels heavier than anger ever could. What's happening now is something BlueFace can't perform his way out of. Because the audience has stopped asking for reactions. They're waiting for truth. Not loud truth. Not emotional truth. Documented truth. Insiders continue to hint that something is coming, not as a dramatic reveal, but as a clarification. A calm explanation of how language like mid and replacement didn't come out of nowhere. How it fits into a longer story of praise turning into dismissal once boundaries appear. And once that context is laid out, there will be no debate. No, both sides. No reframing. Just recognition. That's why this moment feels so tense. Because recognition is irreversible. Once people see a pattern clearly, they don't unsee it. They don't wait for apologies. They don't need further confirmation. They simply adjust how they view the person at the center. And that adjustment is already happening. Quietly, collectively, permanently. BlueFace may still think this is just another headline, another clip, another moment that will pass. But the audience has already moved on to a different question entirely. If this is how he talks about the mothers of his children, what does that say about how he values anyone once they stop serving him? That question doesn't need an answer right away. Because the behavior already answered it. And now, everyone is watching to see whether the next move deepens the pattern, or finally breaks it. Either way, this story isn't ending with a clapback. It's ending with a conclusion. And once conclusions form in the public mind, there's no reset, there's only after. At this stage, the silence isn't empty anymore. It's loaded. Because when nothing is said for this long, when no denial comes, no apology, no clarification, people stop waiting for a response and start drawing conclusions. And those conclusions are sticking. According to insiders, BlueFace has noticed it too. Not in trending topics, not in reaction videos, but in something far more telling. The way people around him have changed how they speak to him. Less hype, less you good. More pauses, more distance, more conversations that end quickly. That shift matters. Because it signals a loss of trust, not outrage. Outrage fades. Distrust doesn't. Sources say BlueFace still believes he can redirect the narrative with confidence alone. That if he stays firm, keeps moving, keeps acting unbothered, the moment will pass. But what he's misreading is the type of attention this has become. This isn't curiosity anymore. It's evaluation. People are no longer asking what he meant. They're asking what he believes. And belief is harder to defend than words. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's approach continues to unsettle people in his orbit. According to those close to her, she hasn't spoken about him at all, not privately, not emotionally, not even in frustration. Her focus is described as narrow and intentional. Routine, stability, distance. That kind of detachment isn't dramatic, it's decisive. And decisive people don't speak until it serves a purpose. That's why so many insiders are uneasy. Because silence like that doesn't suggest confusion, it suggests clarity that hasn't been shared yet. Chrisean's silence is different. It's heavier. Sources close to her say she's oscillating between disbelief and resignation. Not trying to defend herself, not trying to attack him. Just sitting with the realization that the way she loved and the way she fought for him didn't earn protection or respect when it mattered. Being publicly labeled mid by someone you endured chaos for doesn't just hurt, it rewrites memory. It forces you to look back and ask whether the love you believed in was ever mutual or just tolerated. That kind of reckoning is quiet and dangerous. Because when someone reaches that point, they stop acting from emotion and start acting from truth. Insiders are saying that's where both women are now, not aligned, not collaborating, not plotting, but independently arriving at the same conclusion. And that's what BlueFace didn't expect. He expected rivalry. He expected chaos. He expected noise. What he didn't expect was parallel clarity. Because when two women with completely different personalities respond the same way by stepping back, going quiet, and letting behavior speak, it exposes something deeper than drama. It exposes pattern. And patterns don't require commentary. They just need time. That's why the pressure hasn't exploded yet. It's compressing. According to insiders, BlueFace is aware something else is coming. He doesn't know what, he doesn't know when, but he knows the energy is off. That people are waiting, not reacting. And waiting is dangerous. Because when the audience waits, it means they believe there's more to learn. Whether that comes as a calm explanation, a quiet confirmation, or a subtle shift that says everything without words, no one knows yet. But one thing is clear. This story is no longer about shock value. It's about character. And once a conversation moves into that territory, there's no viral trick that brings it back. The next development won't be loud. It won't be messy. It won't be emotional. It will be simple. And simplicity is what makes it irreversible. Because once people understand why someone speaks the way they do, once they see how easily value turns into dismissal, the story stops evolving. It settles. And whatever happens next won't change that. It will only confirm it. By now, the silence has done more damage than any headline ever could. Because when people stop arguing and start watching, it means they're no longer confused. They're assessing. And that's exactly where this situation has landed. According to insiders, the conversations around BlueFace have shifted from, "What did he mean?" to, "This is who he is." That shift is subtle, but it's deadly. Once people stop giving you the benefit of the doubt, every past moment gets re-examined through a new lens. Old clips feel different now. Old jokes land colder. Old praise sounds conditional. And that's why this isn't blowing up the way his controversies usually do. It's sinking in. Sources say BlueFace has tried to keep his tone the same, confident, detached, dismissive of criticism, but the response isn't matching his energy anymore. People aren't pushing back loudly. They aren't even reacting with anger. They're disengaging. And disengagement is the one thing bravado can't fight. Behind the scenes, insiders claim BlueFace has started asking people what they think quietly, indirectly, fishing for reassurance without directly admitting he feels the shift. But the responses he's getting aren't comforting. They're vague. They're non-committal. They're careful. Which tells him everything he needs to know, even if he won't admit it. Because when people believe you'll listen, they speak honestly. When they believe you won't, they speak safely. And right now, people are speaking safely around him. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's absence from the narrative has reached a point where it's no longer interpreted as restraint, it's interpreted as finality. According to those close to her, she hasn't expressed anger, sadness, or confusion, just resolve. Her energy isn't waiting to speak. It's already moved on. That realization has changed how people view the situation entirely. Because once someone emotionally exits, the power dynamic flips. The insults lose their sting. The narrative loses its leverage. And that's when the audience starts asking a different question. If she's not reacting, what does she already know? That question is dangerous, because it invites speculation grounded in pattern, not emotion. Chrisean's quiet, on the other hand, has begun to feel heavier by the day. Sources close to her say she's not spiraling publicly but privately. She's confronting something she's avoided for a long time. That love doesn't guarantee respect. That loyalty doesn't protect you from dismissal. That chaos doesn't bond people, it just delays the inevitable. Being called mid wasn't the deepest wound. The deepest wound was realizing how easily it was said, because people don't casually devalue what they truly respect. And that realization is settling into her slowly, painfully, and permanently. Insiders say this is why she hasn't lashed out. Because lashing out would mean she's still fighting for something, and she's beginning to understand there's nothing left to fight for. What's happening now isn't explosive. It's transformative. BlueFace built his image on chaos, reaction, spectacle. But spectacle only works when people are emotionally invested. And that investment is evaporating not just from fans, but from people in his real life. According to sources, the most alarming thing for him isn't backlash. It's indifference. Indifference from people who used to defend him. Indifference from people who used to excuse him. Indifference from people who once found his controversies entertaining. Because indifference signals the end of the cycle. And that's why insiders believe the next move will be critical. Either BlueFace attempts to reclaim control with another statement, one meant to reassert dominance and dismiss criticism again. Or he stays silent long enough that the story finishes writing itself without him. Both options carry consequences. Because if he speaks, he risks confirming the pattern people already see. If he stays quiet, he allows that pattern to harden without resistance. And here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. The audience doesn't need closure from him anymore. They already reached it on their own. What they're waiting for now isn't a reaction. It's confirmation. Confirmation that the way he speaks about women, especially the mothers of his children, isn't a slip, a joke, or a moment of anger. It's a mindset. And once a mindset is exposed, no amount of confidence can put it back in the dark. That's why this moment feels different. No yelling, no chaos, no viral screaming matches. Just a slow, collective understanding forming in real time. And when understanding replaces outrage, the damage becomes permanent. Whatever happens next, whether someone speaks, whether documentation surfaces, whether silence continues, this story has already crossed the point where it can be spun. It's no longer unfolding. It's concluding. And the conclusion isn't loud. It's quiet. The kind of quiet that follows you long after the noise is gone. At this point, even the people who used to thrive off the chaos are uncomfortable. Because what's happening now isn't entertaining, it's revealing. According to insiders, BlueFace has started to feel boxed in by his own words. Not because anyone forced him to explain them, but because they keep resurfacing in conversations he can't control. Private rooms, business discussions, casual check-ins where someone pauses before responding. That pause is everything. It means people are thinking before they speak to him now. And that's a shift he's not used to. Sources say he's noticed that when his name comes up, it's no longer followed by laughter or hype. It's followed by qualifiers. Yeah. But, I mean, he does that. You know how he talks. Those qualifiers used to protect him. Now they expose him. Because once people start explaining your behavior to others, they're no longer defending you, they're managing expectations. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's silence has become almost symbolic. She hasn't tried to reclaim her narrative. She hasn't tried to clean up the mess. She hasn't tried to compete with the insult. And that's what makes it powerful. People are starting to interpret her quiet as strength, not avoidance. As someone who doesn't need to argue her worth with someone who already decided to dismiss it. Insiders say she's focused on creating separation in ways that don't require announcements. Different routines, different circles, different priorities. And when someone chooses distance without drama, it sends a message louder than any post ever could. It says, I don't need to prove anything to you. Chrisean's path looks different, but the destination feels similar. Sources close to her say she's struggling with a sense of humiliation she can't shake. Not because of public opinion, but because of the finality in his tone. The way he said, mid. The way he talked about replacement like a plan, not a thought. That kind of language forces a reckoning. Because once you hear it, you can't pretend you didn't. People close to Chrisean say she's been asking questions lately not about him, but about herself. About why she stayed. About what she ignored. About how much she normalized because chaos felt familiar. Those questions don't get answered quickly. They change how you move forever. And here's where the story tightens again. According to insiders, BlueFace is now aware that whatever comes next will be interpreted as confirmation. A new relationship, a new statement, even continued silence. Every move is being watched through the same lens, and that lens is unforgiving. Because the public has already connected the dots. They've seen how praise turns into dismissal. They've seen how loyalty turns into leverage. They've seen how motherhood gets reduced once it stops serving the narrative. And once people see that, they don't need more proof. They need consistency, which is why the pressure hasn't exploded. It's condensed. People are waiting not for drama, but for clarity. Waiting to see if anyone involved will speak plainly, calmly, without theatrics. Waiting to see if the pattern will be acknowledged or doubled down on. And insiders say the next move won't come with noise. It'll come with intention, because when silence stretches this long, it's no longer indecision, it's preparation. And when preparation ends, something always drops. Whether it's a quiet confirmation, a subtle shift that says everything, or a moment that forces the story to lock into place. One thing is certain, this isn't about mid anymore. It's about how easily respect left the room. And once that's exposed, there's no rewind. What finally makes this moment impossible to ignore is that nothing new needs to happen for the damage to be real, because the story has already told on itself. At this stage, BlueFace isn't being judged for one sentence. He's being evaluated for a mindset, and mindsets don't get the benefit of the doubt once they're exposed. According to insiders, even the people who once laughed things off are no longer joking. Conversations about him have become careful, measured, almost cautious. Not because anyone is afraid of him, but because people don't want to be associated with what he represents right now. That's a quiet form of consequence most people never see coming, because fame teaches you how to survive noise. It doesn't teach you how to survive withdrawal. And withdrawal is exactly what's happening. No dramatic cancellations, no public denouncements, just fewer doors opening, fewer invitations, fewer chances. That's how reputations actually change. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's distance has reached a point where it feels permanent. According to those close to her, she isn't angry, and she isn't waiting for anything. She's accepted something fully, and acceptance doesn't look like peace, it looks like detachment. Detachment is dangerous for someone who relies on reaction, because once a woman detaches, the narrative ends on her terms without permission, without announcement. And people are starting to respect that. They see a woman who didn't beg for validation, didn't argue her value, didn't fight publicly for dignity. She simply stepped away. That silence reframes everything, BlueFace said. Because when someone insults you and you don't respond, it forces the audience to decide who looks smaller. And right now, it's not her. Chrisean's quiet remains heavier, more fragile, but it's changing too. Sources close to her say the hurt has started turning into something steadier, less reactive, more reflective. Like someone slowly realizing that chaos doesn't equal love and never did. That shift matters. Because once someone stops confusing intensity with connection, the story they tell themselves changes forever. And that's what people are sensing. Two very different women. Two very different responses. Same destination. Distance. And BlueFace? He's now standing alone at the center of a story that's no longer about drama, it's about character consistency. The public isn't angry. They're finished analyzing. They've already concluded what they needed to. Every new silence confirms it. Every casual comment reinforces it. Every attempt to brush it off hardens it. And that's why the next move carries so much weight. Because if BlueFace speaks again, minimizing, reframing, asserting dominance, it will only validate what people already believe. And if he stays silent, the conclusion still stands. That's the trap of exposure. Once people see the pattern, you don't get to explain your way out of it. You can only change or accept how you're seen. And insiders say this moment will be remembered not for what was said, but for what wasn't. No apology, no reflection, no acknowledgement of how deeply those words landed. And that absence speaks volumes. Because when someone shows you how easily they reduce the mothers of their children to a label, how casually they talk about replacement instead of responsibility, how quickly admiration turns into dismissal, people stop asking for clarity. They assume intention, and intention is the hardest thing to defend once it's exposed. That's why this story doesn't need a final explosion. It already landed, quietly, permanently. The only thing left now is time, and time doesn't soften conclusions, it cements them. What's unsettling now is that the story has reached a point where nothing BlueFace says will sound new. Because the audience already understands the language he's using. They've heard it before, just not this clearly. According to insiders, The people still around him aren't trying to hype him up anymore. They're trying to manage outcomes. Conversations aren't about how to spin this. They're about how to contain it. And containment only happens when something is seen as real damage, not temporary noise. That's when the gravity of this moment finally hits. Because when people stop trying to defend you and start trying to protect themselves from being associated with you, the shift is permanent. Sources say BlueFace has begun sensing that the room feels colder. Not hostile, just less forgiving. He's still being spoken to, but not leaned into. Still being acknowledged, but not celebrated. And for someone who built momentum off attention, that difference is jarring. He may still believe this is just another cycle, but cycles only repeat when nothing changes. And something has already changed. The audience. They're not waiting for a punchline anymore. They're waiting for proof of growth or proof that growth isn't coming. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's silence continues to reshape the narrative in ways no public statement ever could. People aren't imagining her hurt anymore, they're imagining her finished. Finished explaining, finished negotiating, finished carrying emotional weight that was never returned. And that's why the comments shifted from sympathy to respect, because there's power in not fighting to be valued by someone who already decided to devalue you. Chrisean's silence, though different in texture, is moving toward the same conclusion. Sources close to her say the embarrassment has settled into clarity. She's no longer asking why he said it. She's asking why she ever tolerated language that made replacement feel normal. That's not anger. That's awakening. And awakenings don't end in drama. They end in distance. What BlueFace is facing now isn't backlash, it's redefinition. People are no longer asking what he meant. They're defining him by what he allowed himself to say publicly, without hesitation. And definitions, once formed, are stubborn. Insiders say there's pressure for him to speak again, to assert control, to remind people of his confidence, to reset the narrative with bravado. But bravado doesn't work when the audience has moved from emotion to evaluation. Confidence without accountability doesn't read as strength. It reads as avoidance. That's why the next move matters less for what it says, and more for what it confirms. If he doubles down, the pattern hardens. If he reframes, it looks calculated. If he stays silent, the conclusion remains untouched. There's no win left, only consequence management. And here's the part no one wants to say out loud. The most damaging thing wasn't calling them mid. It was talking about replacement like a plan. Because that revealed how easily motherhood, history, and human connection get reduced once they stop serving a narrative. That's what people can't unhear. And that's why this moment feels heavy, not loud. No trending outrage. No explosive collapse. Just a slow, irreversible understanding settling into place. The audience isn't shocked anymore. They're convinced. And once conviction sets in, the story stops needing updates. It becomes a reference point. A moment people point back to and say, that's when we saw it clearly. Whatever comes next, silence, statements, new faces, it won't change that reference point. Because respect, once shown to be optional, is remembered as conditional. And conditional respect never survives time. That's the real ending unfolding now. Not with noise, with certainty. And that's where this moment officially stops being a headline and becomes a line in the sand. Because nothing dramatic needs to happen next for the meaning to stick. It already has. People aren't refreshing their feeds waiting for an explosion anymore. They're sitting with what was said and what it revealed. The confidence, the dismissal, the casual way motherhood was reduced to a rating and a replaceable role. That doesn't fade. It echoes. According to insiders, even BlueFace understands now that something shifted, but he may not fully grasp what. He's reading it as temporary distance, not permanent reassessment. As people cooling off, not people deciding. And that misread is costly. Because when people decide quietly, there's no warning shot. They just move differently. Opportunities feel colder. Rooms feel quieter. Support feels thinner. And you don't notice it all at once until you do. Meanwhile, the silence from Jaidyn and Chrisean has done something unexpected. Instead of fueling rivalry, it's created contrast. Two women. Two personalities. Same conclusion. Distance. No fighting each other. No scrambling for validation. No performing pain for an audience. Just stepping back. And that's what made people pause. Because when the people you try to diminish don't rush to defend themselves, it forces the spotlight back onto you. It asks a question no insult can dodge. Why did you need to say that at all? The audience has already answered in their own minds. Not because they hate him, not because they're biased, but because patterns explain themselves when you stop interrupting them. And now, everything that happens next will be read through that lens. If he speaks again, people will listen for empathy and hear intent. If he stays silent, people will assume confirmation. If he moves on publicly, people will call it replacement, not growth. There is no neutral path left. That's the reality of moments like this. They don't end with a bang. They end with a shift. And shifts don't reverse easily. So now the conversation turns to you. Do you think calling the mothers of your children mid is just honesty, or a glimpse into how someone really values people once they stop serving him? Do you believe silence from the women involved is weakness, or the strongest response possible? And when someone talks about needing a new baby mother, does that sound like confidence or avoidance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Because this isn't just celebrity drama anymore, it's a conversation about respect, accountability, and what people reveal when they think they're untouchable. Make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because if anyone involved finally decides to speak not emotionally, but clearly, you'll want to hear it when it happens. This story isn't ending with an argument. It's ending with a conclusion. And conclusions last. The truth is, by now the ending is already writing itself, not because anyone announced it, but because no one rushed to fix it. And when something this heavy is left sitting in the open, it hardens. According to insiders, BlueFace has started noticing that people aren't asking him questions anymore. Not, what happened? Not, what did you mean? Those questions used to give him room to control the story. Now, people already think they know the answer. That's the most dangerous phase of any public moment, when the audience stops listening and starts concluding. Because conclusions don't need updates. They just wait for confirmation. And every day that passes without reflection, accountability, or humility feels like confirmation. What's quietly changing the tone is how normal people are reacting now. Not fan pages, not drama blogs, but everyday listeners, parents, women, even men who used to excuse the behavior. They're not outraged. They're disappointed. And disappointment lasts longer than anger. Anger burns hot and fast. Disappointment settles in and rewrites how you're remembered. That's what BlueFace doesn't seem to understand yet. According to sources, people in his orbit have stopped trying to challenge him directly. Instead, they've started adjusting how close they stand to the fire. Less involvement, less attachment, less willingness to be publicly aligned. Because when someone shows you how easily they talk about replacing the mothers of their children, it forces a question no one wants to answer out loud. What happens when I become inconvenient too? That question changes everything. Meanwhile, Jaidyn's silence has reached a point where it's no longer interpreted as waiting. It's interpreted as finished. Finished explaining. Finished clarifying. Finished hoping to be understood by someone who already chose dismissal. And that's why people respect it. Because she didn't rush to defend her value. She let the insult expose the mindset. Chrisean's silence still carries weight, but it's different. Hers feels like mourning not just a relationship, but an illusion. The illusion that loyalty, chaos, and sacrifice would eventually earn protection. That illusion cracked the moment the word mid left his mouth. Because people don't downgrade what they value. They downgrade what they've already emotionally replaced. That realization is what's hitting her now, slowly and painfully. And that's why this story hasn't exploded. It's sinking in. The audience isn't entertained anymore. They're processing. They're remembering past moments that suddenly make sense. Past praise that now sounds conditional. Past insults that no longer feel accidental. And once memory starts lining up with behavior, the story stops needing updates. It becomes a reference. This is when we saw it. That's the part that doesn't go away. BlueFace may still believe time will smooth this over. That another headline will come. Another distraction. Another viral moment to reset attention. But this isn't about attention anymore. It's about trust. And trust doesn't reset just because the timeline moves on. The most telling sign? No one is begging him to explain. They're watching what he does next. Because whatever he does next won't be interpreted generously. It'll be interpreted honestly. And honesty, in this case, isn't loud. It's final. So when people look back on this moment, they won't remember it as, that time he said something wild. They'll remember it as the moment his words finally caught up with his pattern. The moment admiration turned into evaluation. The moment silence said more than shouting ever could. And whether he realizes it or not, that moment already passed. Everything after this is just confirmation. And this is where the story doesn't explode, it locks in. Because this was never just about one comment. It was about the mindset behind the comment. Mid. New baby mother. Those words don't come out by accident. They come out when someone has already emotionally checked out, when people start feeling replaceable instead of respected. And the heaviest part? Those words were aimed at the mothers of his children. The internet didn't react because it was messy. The internet reacted because the pattern became clear. When admiration only exists while someone is convenient, when respect disappears the moment boundaries show up, when honesty becomes a shield for dismissal. The loudest part of this story wasn't yelling. It was silence. Jaidyn's silence. Chrisean's silence. And when two very different women respond the same way by stepping back, the problem stops being rivalry. The focus shifts to the center. Now the question is yours to answer. Is calling the mothers of your children mid just honesty, or a glimpse into how someone really values people once they stop serving him? Is silence weakness or the strongest response possible? And when someone talks about needing a new baby mother, does that sound like growth or avoidance? Drop your real thoughts in the comments. If you want more breakdowns like this, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications because insiders are saying this chapter is closed. But the next one is already loading. And when the silence finally breaks, it won't be loud, it'll be clarity.